The woman walked through the school completely naked, but she didn't feel a shred of shame. Bystanders stared at her in disbelief, shocked by how proud she seemed. Several men nearby were left utterly speechless, and the reason she acted so brazenly was that she was stuck in a time loop. Every night, a masked man would kill her, and when she woke up the next day, everyone around her would have forgotten everything. Tree Geldman was notorious at school for being a player. She spent her nights in different guys' beds. This morning, she woke up in a dorm like usual, and she couldn't remember much of what happened the night before. She had drunk a lot of alcohol the previous night, but Carter taking her back to his dorm wasn't something that surprised her. After all, this wasn't the first time something like this had happened to her. Just then, Carter's buddy suddenly burst through the door, loudly asking if Carter had conquered Tree Geldman the night before. The situation grew awkward, but Tree Geldman didn't mind and simply turned to leave Carter's dorm room. As soon as she stepped outside, a man leered at her with lustful eyes. Then, a girl stopped her to hand out a flyer about environmental protection, followed by a car alarm going off and a guy fainting on the lawn. Little did she know that these seemingly ordinary events would soon plunge her into utter despair. As she kept walking, a guy suddenly confessed his feelings to her around the corner, and she rejected him on the spot, sneering and humiliating him. Afterward, she went back to her dorm, where her roommate had prepared a small cake for her. It was her birthday, but Tree Geldman threw the cake in the trash without a second thought, saying that her birthday wish was for a better roommate. Later that afternoon, she went to the hospital to meet her lover, a doctor, and they were about to get intimate, but their meeting was interrupted when the doctor's wife unexpectedly showed up, so they had to pretend they were just studying together. That night, she was heading to her birthday party when something eerie happened as she passed through a tunnel. There was a music box playing the Happy Birthday song on repeat, and Tree Geldman thought it was a prank her friends had set up, so she turned around and called for them to come out, but no one answered, and then a masked man appeared behind her, scaring her half to death. He grabbed Tree Geldman by the hair and stabbed her, the horror of which jolted her awake. This was her first time in the loop, and Tree Geldman was confused, wondering if it had all been just a nightmare. But then, everything started happening exactly as it had in the dream, even down to the words Carter said. Once again, Carter's friend barged into the room, just like in her dream. When Tree Geldman stepped outside, everything in the school unfolded exactly the same way. First, the guy, then the promoter, and then the car alarm went off. Around the corner, the same guy confessed his feelings, and she was bewildered as she asked what day it was. He replied, "It's Monday, the 18th. Tree Geldman was in disbelief and returned to her dorm, where her roommate once again presented her with the birthday cake. This time, though, Tree Geldman didn't throw it away. She set it on the table instead. She then went to meet the doctor, but this time, she locked the door behind them. She knew that during their kiss, the doctor's wife would come checking in, and sure enough, she did. That night, on her way to the party, she passed through the same dark tunnel where the music box still sat. Remembering what had happened last time, Tree Geldman got scared and ran the other way. This time, she made it to the party safely, but when she opened the door, the masked man was already waiting for her inside. Instinctively, she punched him, but when the lights came on, she realized it was all part of the birthday surprise her friends had planned for her. Relieved, Tree Geldman decided to make it up to the friend she just hit, and the two of them went upstairs to get closer, but then the real masked man appeared, and the music was so loud that Tree Geldman didn't hear her friend's screams as he was murdered. When she turned around, she mistook the masked man for her friend. The masked man lunged at Tree Geldman with a knife and shattered a bottle nearby. With a scream of terror, Tree Geldman was once again back in Carter's bed, her second death loop. This time, she realized the gravity of the situation and hurriedly got dressed to leave the room, where she ran into Carter's friend again. Everything outside was just as it had been yesterday, and in a panic, she rushed back to her dorm to tell her roommate what was happening. Though her roommate didn't believe everything Tree Geldman said, she still offered some helpful advice. Tell her to seal all the doors and windows, stay in the dorm, and go nowhere. Maybe everything will be normal when she wakes up tomorrow. But what she didn't expect was that the killer was hiding in her closet. Luckily, Tree Geldman dodged the fatal blow in time, but when she tried to escape, she realized she had blocked all the exits herself. The masked man caught up to her and easily killed Tree Geldman again. After multiple loops, Tree Geldman was on the verge of collapse. She ran out of the room in a panic. Everything was exactly the same as the previous times, leaving her completely at a loss. In despair, she threw herself into Carter's arms, and the two of them went to a cafe. After a conversation, she learned that Carter hadn't taken advantage of her the night before. It was rare for her to meet someone as decent as Carter, and she was deeply touched, even starting to develop feelings for him. She then told Carter everything that had been happening to her. He suggested that since she could come back to life infinitely, she had countless chances to find the killer. If she could kill the murderer before they struck, perhaps she could break out of the loop. But after ruling out everyone she had conflicts with, she realized none of them were the killer. It suddenly dawned on her that being stuck in the loop might not be such a bad thing. She could finally try all the things she had always wanted to do but was too scared to attempt. However, this time, something unexpected happened. When she woke up, she felt dizzy and could barely stand. Tree Geldman collapsed just as she reached the door. When she woke up again, she was in the hospital and, through a daze, saw the masked man approaching her. She was terrified and braced herself for death, only to realize it was Carter walking toward her. It turned out that after she collapsed, Carter had taken her to the hospital. Not long after, Tree Geldman's lover, the doctor, arrived. He took advantage of his position to send Carter away and showed Tree Geldman her scans. The doctor was shocked because her body was full of wounds, each one deadly. It was a miracle she was still alive after suffering such severe injuries. But all Tree Geldman wanted to do was leave. While the doctor was out of the room, she sneaked out of her hospital bed. She went to the doctor's office and took his car keys. On her way to the garage, she saw the masked man suddenly appear behind the doctor. Tree Geldman ran for her life. Reaching the basement where she found the doctor's car, she quickly started the engine and sped past the masked man. Relieved to have escaped the masked man, Tree Geldman smiled smugly. But then a police car pulled her over for speeding. There was no use in explaining, but she had a clever idea. Maybe being arrested and locked up would be safer. So Tree Geldman lied, claiming she was not only speeding but also driving under the influence, and willingly let the police handcuff her. But just as she was being taken away, the masked man showed up again, and Tree Geldman yelled at him. He didn't respond, instead retrieving a birthday candle from his car. It was then that Tree Geldman realized the police car had already started leaking fuel. The masked man tossed the candle to the ground, and the car exploded instantly. She woke up in the loop once more, but this time she had a clue about the masked man. The news on TV reported that a psychotic killer who targeted young women had been taken to the hospital, and Tree Geldman figured she must be the killer since the masked man had appeared in the hospital before. She rushed to the hospital, grabbed an axe, and entered the room, but she was too late. The cop guarding the killer was already dead, and the murderer, now wearing a mask, was hiding behind the door. Terrified, Tree Geldman ran out, with the masked man hot on her heels. With nowhere to run, the killer finally revealed her true face. Just as she raised her gun to kill Tree Geldman, Carter appeared out of nowhere and tackled the masked man. While the two of them struggled, Tree Geldman grabbed the gun and aimed it at the killer. But when she pulled the trigger, there were no bullets, and she could only watch in horror as Carter's neck was snapped. She fled in terror, with the killer chasing her down to the basement. But Tree Geldman had been waiting for this moment and launched a sneak attack from behind. Now, she could have ended everything, but she realized that if she broke the loop, Carter, who had died saving her, would remain dead forever. So she dropped the weapon, tied a rope around her neck on the rooftop, and jumped off to save Carter. When she woke up again, she immediately rushed to Carter's arms. This time, she was lighthearted and cheerful because she now had a solid lead on the killer. All she needed to do was take them out, and this would finally be over. She armed herself and went to the hospital, taking a gun from the cop and pointing it at the killer. But in a moment of awkwardness, she realized she hadn't removed the safety, and the killer disarmed her, quickly gaining control and pulling out the familiar knife. In a desperate moment, Tree Geldman kicked the killer. Enraging them, they grabbed her and hurled her across the room. Fortunately, Tree Geldman had timed the hospital's blackout perfectly. When the lights came back on, she was behind the killer, successfully shooting them dead. Tree Geldman returned to her dorm and lit the birthday cake her roommate had given her. After blowing out the candle, she wished to see the sun tomorrow. But when she woke up the next day, something was still wrong. How could she still be in the loop after killing the masked man? She hurried back to her room, packing her things to escape. Her roommate handed her the birthday cake once again. Suddenly, it clicked: she had eaten the cake the night before, then died in her sleep. The cake must have been poisoned. She confronted her roommate, asking why she had done it. Her roommate didn't hide it anymore. She had been trying to kill Tree Geldman all along because she had been flirting with the man her roommate liked. It turned out the recent loops had been caused by her roommate, who had poisoned the cake. When Tree Geldman hadn't eaten it before, Her roommate had dressed as the masked man to finish the job at night, but what she never expected was that Tree Geldman fell into a death loop after dying, eventually discovering the whole truth. After that, the two got into a fight, and the loud commotion attracted the neighbors. While the roommate was explaining to the neighbors, Tree Geldman grabbed the poison cake and shoved it into her mouth. Then, grabbing the lamp, she kicked her roommate out the window, finally killing the true murderer behind Tree Geldman's deaths. After going through so much together, Tree Geldman and Carter confirmed their relationship. The next day, Tree Geldman woke up with a gasp, realizing that everything was still the same as before.
It's Tuesday the 19th. You made it.
I just called your phone.
What? I'm gonna kill you!
A man in a car was startled awake by a passing horn, and he staggered along the path back to his dorm, getting scared by a small dog along the way. Then, there was a beggar in the bushes, followed by a delivery guy on a skateboard who nearly hit him. When he finally stumbled back to the dorm and pushed open the door, he interrupted a couple in the heat of the moment. At that moment, Tree Geldman had just ended the death loop, and Carter was furious, telling him to get out immediately. Just then, a phone call came in from the lab, and Ryan Fan's partner informed him that the machine had malfunctioned. It turned out that he and his friends had developed a time machine, but it used so much power that it often caused blackouts on campus. Because of that, the dean came to shut down their experiments. That night, Ryan Fan heard noises in the lab and cautiously went to investigate. Unexpectedly, a masked figure ambushed him, but instead of dying, he woke up in his car. Could it be that he was also trapped in a death loop? Sure enough, the small dog startled him once again. Remembering there would be a beggar in the bushes, he threw a rock to confirm his suspicion, and sure enough, someone was hiding there. The skateboard guy passed by in the same spot, too. When he pushed open the dorm door, Carter was still in bed with Tree Geldman. Ryan Fan, now scared, quickly explained what had happened. As soon as Tree Geldman heard it, she understood. She confirmed that Ryan Fan was stuck in a death loop with his lead. The three of them went to the spot where he was killed, but when they opened the door, there was nothing there. Next, Ryan Fan showed Tree Geldman his great invention, claiming that the machine could possibly alter space or time, though they hadn't fully figured it out yet. However, on the same day Tree Geldman had fallen into her time loop, the device had mysteriously activated. So, they devised a plan for Ryan Fan to lure the masked killer out alone, and at the right moment, they would take down the killer. But when they unmasked the killer, everyone was shocked the person trying to kill Ryan Fan looked exactly like him. When Ryan Fan number 2 woke up, he explained that he was from an alternate timeline. He had tried to escape his time loop but had gotten trapped in a parallel space loop. He believed that the only way to return to his own timeline was to kill the version of himself in this one. Ryan Fan was furious upon hearing this and decided to activate the machine to send the other him away. But just then, the dean and his security team burst in, intending to dismantle the equipment. Ryan Fan tried to stop them with a wrench, but the system had already finished loading, and a massive shockwave knocked everyone back. At the same moment, Tree Geldman hit the ground, and the familiar scene appeared again. She was sent back to the morning of her death loop. Tree Geldman angrily called Ryan Fan over and yelled at him, but she knew how to end the loop, so she stormed out of the dorm with the two of them in tow. Outside, everything looked just as it had before. Soon, they arrived at Tree Geldman's dorm, but this time, her roommate didn't offer her the poison cake. Instead, the roommate simply said goodbye and left for work at the hospital. What shocked her even more was that her boyfriend had become someone else's boyfriend, but the biggest surprise came when she saw her mother, who had long since passed away. In this timeline, the hug felt so real. By the end of the day, Tree Geldman understood she had been brought into a parallel universe by the shockwave. The memories on her social media weren't hers. They belonged to someone else in this timeline. Meanwhile, Ryan Fan had started up the device again, preparing to send Tree Geldman back to her own timeline, but Tree Geldman stopped him, refusing to return. In this world, her mother was still alive, and she wanted to stay with her forever. That night, she saw on the news that the psychotic killer had been taken to the hospital. Tree Geldman immediately became tense, knowing the killer would escape that night, and more innocent people might die. She rushed to the hospital to stop it, but as soon as she entered the room, the police arrested her. On the way back to the police station, the masked killer appeared. Tree Geldman screamed and ran, once again finding herself in the elevator with nowhere to go. She thought the masked killer was her roommate and shouted for her to take off the mask, but her roommate was actually in the elevator behind her and saved her just in time. It seemed that the masked killer in this timeline was someone else. Just then, the elevator lights went out. The masked killer had cut the power. The two of them forced the elevator doors open, but as they searched for an exit, her roommate suddenly stopped in her tracks. When Tree Geldman turned around, she saw that her roommate had been stabbed, and the killer was right behind her. Tree Geldman ran for her life but accidentally fell from the floor above. Fortunately, she would revive, and time reset once again in Carter's bed. To solve the death loop in this timeline, she went to Ryan Fan's lab and demanded he figure out a way to stop her loop. But Ryan Fan explained that the device wasn't fully developed, and shutting it down would require repeated testing, which could take at least 3 days. Then, Ryan Fan came up with an idea. Since Tree Geldman was the only one stuck in the loop and could retain her memory, she could act as a human database to record the failures until they found the correct data. Their plan kicked off, and Tree Geldman began repeatedly killing herself to gather the necessary data as quickly as possible. Just when everything seemed to be going smoothly, Tree Geldman fainted after another revival. As the number of her deaths increased, her body became weaker, and soon Tree Geldman was taken to the hospital. But this time, her lover, the doctor, didn't recognize Tree Geldman. It was 9:30 p.m., and she knew the hospital killer would escape at this time. She hurriedly instructed the doctor to stop him, then found a cop and knocked him out. Grabbing his gun, she rushed to the killer's room, but she was too late. Her roommate had already been murdered. At that moment, the masked figure appeared behind her, and Tree Geldman felt a chill down her spine. She turned and shot him twice, killing him. However, another masked figure was behind her, and she was overpowered. In a moment of desperation, Tree Geldman saw an oxygen tank nearby and said, "Then let's die together." With a gunshot, a massive explosion occurred, and Tree Geldman woke up in her bed once again. Luckily, after several days of experiments, they finally gathered the necessary data to end the cursed loop. But just at this crucial moment, the program malfunctioned. After checking, Ryan Fan realized that a teammate's DVD had caused a virus, and it would take at least 7 to 8 hours to fix it. This meant the killer would still come for her that night. To avoid the killer and successfully shut down the loop machine, she decided to hide with her parents. Meanwhile, Carter went to the hospital, determined to save the people who were destined to die that night. That night, while watching TV in the hotel, Tree Geldman saw the news of a horrific murder at the hospital. The victims included the cop guarding the killer, her roommate, and Carter. Tree Geldman was in utter disbelief. If the loop machine was fixed, it would mean those three would remain dead forever. Unable to bear this, she quickly called Ryan Fan, begging him not to activate the machine, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Frustrated, she grabbed her car keys and sped toward the lab. Ryan Fan had already fixed the machine and successfully activated it. In the last second of the countdown, Tree Geldman crashed her car into the city's power grid, shutting down the system just in time, but she paid the ultimate price with her life. With the machine broken, time reset once again for her. Upon waking up, she realized many things. She couldn't live in a timeline that didn't belong to her. It wouldn't be fair to Carter, who loved her, so she found her mother to say a final goodbye, then went to Ryan Fan, asking him to start the machine and send her back to her own timeline. But the killer's escape was happening again, and she knew her roommate would be killed. She had to save her before the device could activate. She took the cop's gun while he was in the restroom, then boldly walked into the killer's room. As soon as the killer moved, she fired without hesitation. Meanwhile, the device successfully rebooted, but the dean arrived with a group of people. To buy time, they blocked the door with a couch, while Tree Geldman was leading her roommate out of the hospital, only to encounter another masked figure. When the mask was removed, it was the doctor, the same one who didn't recognize her earlier. It turned out that in this timeline, the doctor and her roommate were lovers, but the doctor's wife had found out about their affair. To cover it up, the doctor had released the hospital's serial killer, hoping to use him to do the dirty work. Tree Geldman, holding a gun, had the upper hand, but the doctor's wife suddenly appeared from behind. She shot Tree Geldman's roommate, and the doctor took advantage of the moment to subdue Tree Geldman. Then, the doctor's wife handed him the gun, telling him to finish it all. To everyone's surprise, the doctor shot his wife instead. He revealed his motive to divorce her and blame everything on the serial killer, crafting the perfect alibi. Just as the doctor was about to kill Tree Geldman, she suddenly activated the MRI machine. The powerful magnetic force pinned the doctor to the machine. Tree Geldman released a screwdriver, and the doctor died instantly. Her roommate, though injured, wasn't fatally wounded and was out of danger. At that moment, the hospital lights began to flicker, signaling that the machine had started working. Meanwhile, Ryan Fan's group was facing the dean. who broke through the door just as he was about to cut the power. The device fully activated. With a burst of energy from the shockwave, Tree Geldman returned to her original timeline. The group slowly regained consciousness, and the Carter in front of her was the one that belonged to her. The other Ryan fan was sent back from the shockwave to their awakening. Only a split second had passed. Yet, in that instant, Tree Geldman had been sent to another dimension. As she returned, the time loop finally ended.